everyone, welcome back to my channel Tutelage, a guide to learner here. This is Sripurna. I hope all of you are doing great. So we have already discussed in my last session structural changes in the Indian economy and which is one of the most important. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Tutelage, a guide to learner here. This is Sripurna. I hope all of you are doing great. So in my last session, we have already discussed structural changes in the Indian economy and we have already told the new economic policy was based on three major policy measures, namely liberalization, privatizations and globalization. So we have already told what is the basic meaning of liberalizations and what is the significance of it and their policies, their features also. So today we are going to discuss another policy measures of new economic policy, that is privatization. Okay. If you have missed my previous sessions, so please go and check it once. Links of the previous sessions are available in my first comment and my description box. So please go and visit my channel. Okay. Let's begin the session and move on the next slide. And here we can see some subtopics which we are discussing today. So the first topic, that is meaning of privatization. Second topic is arguments for privatizations, and third topic, that is arguments against the privatizations. Okay. And last concept about privatizations, that is some features of privatization. So I think this is clear what will be the today's discussion topic. Okay, so meaning of privatizations, some arguments for privatizations, some arguments against privatizations and its features. So now move on to the main slide. So here we can see our next, our first topic, basically meaning of privatization. So today we are going to explain the basically the policy of privatization. Okay. So at first we have to know what do you mean by a policy of privatization. Okay. The public sector enterprises were established in many countries primarily for pragmatic reasons but partly for the ideological reasons. In recent years, however, with the emergence of a new philosophy of economic liberalizations, the private sector and the market forces have acquired prominence once again. So, at this juncture, the faith in the public sector is shaken. So, this is particularly in case in the developing countries such as India. So, in the past, the policymakers in these countries traditionally held the view that the public sector was the prime mover for economic development. The industrial policy of resolution of 1956 assigned a strategic role to the public sector in India also. So, but and So here we can see the policy of privatization, and we have already told the new economic policy was based on three policy measures. First one is liberalization, second one is privatizations, and third one is uh, globalizations. And globalizations is one of the most important policy measures of Indian economy. So today we are going to explain what do you mean by a policy of privatization. Okay, so at first we have to know what do you mean by a privatizations. So privatizations basically implies the process which leads to transfer of ownership of public sector enterprises from the government to the private sector. So basically privatizations is a process which leads to transfer of ownership from public sector to private sector. Okay. So the process of privatization basically started first in the UK, USA during 1980s, and under the leadership of the Mrs. Margaret Thatcher became the champion of the privatizations, and it set in motion the program of privatization of state run enterprises by transferring British Airways to the private sector. A number of public sector companies, including railways, oil, telecommunications, mining, and bus services, were sold off. So, privatization of the public sector enterprises was undertaken on a large scale by President Ronald Reagan in USA almost at the same time. So, these gave an impetus to the privatization in other developed countries of the world, such as West Germany, France, Japan, Canada, Italy, etc. So, I think this is clear. What do you mean by a privatization? So, privatizations implies the process of granting autonomy, the transfer of ownership to the public sector enterprises in decision making, and infusing the spirit of commercializations in them. So basically the public sector, now going to the second thing, that is policy of privatization. So what do you mean by a policy of privatization? So basically, the public sector enterprises were established in many countries primarily for the pragmatic reasons, but partly for ideological reasons. So in recent years, with the emergence of a new philosophy of economic liberalizations, the private sector and the market forces have acquired prominence once again. So at this juncture, the faith in the public sector is shaken. This is particularly the case in developing countries such as India. In the past, the policymakers in these countries traditionally held the view that the public sector was the prime mover for economic development. The Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956 assigned a strategic role to the public sector in India also. So, accordingly, massive investment was undertaken during the 5 year plans to build the public sector. So, there is no doubt that the public sector in India was able to establish the industrial base in the country by developing heavy and basic industries and by providing requisite infrastructure also. So, but developing countries all over the world today are witnessing a change in their perception about the role of the public sector in the process of economic development. So, in this scenario, the role of public sector enterprises is being reappraised. So, in fact, the public sector enterprises are losing their importance in India. Also, the role of public sector is undergoing a change in the wake of new economic policy. So, an important factor. So, that's why privatization is one of the most important factor responsible for decline in the popularity of the public sector enterprises in many countries as well as in developing countries is so that's why this is the basic process of privatization, and this implies the policy of privatization also. So I think this is clear what is the basic meaning of privatizations and what is the basic policy of privatizations. I think this is clear. So now going to the next slide. So, we have already told what is the basic meaning of privatizations, and here we can see our next topic, that is some arguments for privatization. Okay, so the supporters of privatizations have put forward the following arguments in support of such privatizations, and that's why the first point, that is 1 minute. The first point, that is ideological ground. Okay, so just a minute, learner, just change the color. Okay, so the first point, that is ideological ground. So, privatizations in advanced countries is favored on ideological grounds, and we have already told the public sector enterprises were established in many countries primarily for pragmatic reasons but partly for ideological reasons. So, that's why some arguments for privatizations. Ideological ground is one of the most important part of that. Okay, so privatization in the advanced countries or the developed countries is favored on the ideological grounds. The central idea of this argument is the public sector enterprises should be confined to essential activities which the private sector cannot or will not perform. So, all other activities should be performed by the private sector enterprises as they are more efficient. Okay, so I think the ideological ground, so what is the basic meaning behind the ideological grounds about privatizations is clear to everyone. So now going to the next point, that is improvement in managerial efficiency. So privatizations is supported as a means of improving managerial efficiency, and privatizations through investment privatizations through disinvestment will establish a direct relationship between shareholders and the management. So the private shareholders would have direct interest in increasing the efficiency of these enterprises. So the management would not be subjected to uncalled for political pressure and interference, and these would remove the managerial efficiency of public sector enterprises that arises due to political intervention. Management would be guided by economic and commercial considerations. It will help in improving the quality of decision making. So, privatization helps to improve in managerial efficiency also. Now, move on to the third point, that is creation of competitive environment. So, transfer of the ownership of the public sector enterprises to the private sector enterprises would abolish the monopoly position. So these enterprises will have to compete with other similar enterprises, so the competitive environment can be created, and it would help in improving the competitive this competitive environment would help in improving the competitive strength and efficiency of the private sector enterprises. I think this is clear. So creation of competitive environment is also one of the most important reasons for supporting reasons for privatization. So now going to the fourth point, profit oriented decisions. Privatization's policy will help in infusing the commercial spirit in the functioning of enterprises. So the private sector will introduce the profit oriented decision making process in the working of enterprises. So it will lead to an improvement in efficiency and performance of the enterprises also. So profit oriented decisions. So supporting arguments for privatizations, profit oriented decisions is one of the most important thing also. So now move on to the the fifth point, fifth arguments for privatizations, that is greater flexibility in decision making. So the public sector enterprises normally don't enjoy sufficient functional autonomy. Okay, there is flexible there is a, basically in the public sector enterprises there is no flexibility in decision making process. Okay, so that's why they don't enjoy the sufficient functional autonomy. It leads to delay in decision making also. So in fact the delayed decision making is often equivalent to making no decision at all. So the policy of privatization will be helpful in imparting greater flexibility in decision making process, because management would be free from any government intervention. Okay, so basically this is the private sector enterprises. So management would be free, so it would not have to consult anyone for any decision. That's why there is a greater flexibility in decision making process than the public sector enterprises, and it would be possible to take a quick and timely decisions, and which is a hallmark of efficiency. So I think this is clear. So greater flexibility in decision making is one of the most important supporting arguments for privatizations. So the first point is ideological ground, the second point is improvement in managerial efficiency, third point is creation of competitive environment, fourth point is profit oriented decisions, and the fifth point, that is greater flexibility in decision making. So now going to the next slide for another some arguments for privatization. The the sixth point is reduction in burden on public exchequer. Okay. So, operation of the public sector enterprises has been putting a large burden on public exchequer because of huge losses incurred by a number of enterprises and growing amount of subsidy payments. So privatization would be helpful in reducing this financial burden on the government. So government would not be under obligation of providing subsidy and making up for the losses. So that's why privatizations helps to reduction in burden on public exchequer. Okay. So now move on to the next point, greater attention to consumer satisfaction. So which is one of the most important arguments for privatizations also. So it is often argued that the public sector enterprises many a time don't get personally involved with the needs of the consumers. However, the very survival of the private enterprises depends on the basically satisfaction of the consumer demand. So in privatizations, consumer satisfaction is one of the most important thing, and privatization will lead to the consumers being taken care of because of the need for creating and sustaining market. So hence quality of service will improve in the private sector enterprises than the public sector enterprises. So now move on to the next point, that is greater investment and employment opportunities. So privatization, we all know that privatizations will lead to opening up of new areas to the private sector enterprises. So it will lead to the increase in the investment by the private sector. Higher investment means creation of larger employment and income earning opportunity. We all know that higher investment would mean creation of larger employment and income earning opportunities in the economy. So, in privatizations, there is a greater scope of investment and employment opportunities. That's why privatization is good for developing a new economy. Okay, so now move on to the last point. The last point is increase in accountability and financial discipline. So, we all know that personnel in the public sector enterprises are not accountable for any lapse. There is always the scope of responsibility being shifted to others. So, however, the areas of responsibility in the private sector are clearly defined. Thus, the privatization will lead to an increase in accountability of the personnel managing these enterprises. So, that's why privatization helps to increase in accountability also. And now move on to the next point, that is so now move on to the next point, that is increase in accountability and financial discipline. At first we have to know uh, why the privatization uh, increase in account shit. So now move on to the last point, that is increase in accountability and financial discipline. So the personnel in the public sector enterprises are not accountable for any lapse, and we all know that there is always the scope of responsibility being shifted to others. So, however, the areas of responsibility in the private sector are clearly defined. Thus, privatization will lead to an increase in accountability of the personnel managing these enterprises. So, that's why privatization helps to increase in accountability and increase in financial discipline also. So, now we have to discuss uh, increase in financial discipline, and which is the basically the last arguments for privatization. So the public sector enterprises cannot budgetary support irrespective of their performance, but the private sector enterprises will be able to raise funds in the capital market only if they are performing well. So therefore privatization will put pressure on the enterprises to perform well in order to raise funds in the capital market. So these will improve their financial discipline also. So privatizations helps to reduction in burden on public exchequer. Privatization helps to greater attention to the consumer satisfaction. Privatizations helps to greater investment and employment opportunities, and it increase in accountability and financial discipline. So I think all arguments for privatizations are clear to everyone. So if you have any doubts, so please do one comment in my comment section. I will reply you positively. Okay. And if you have missed my previous session that is on liberalization, so Leonard, all points for arguments for so Leonard, all points for privatization. Um 1 minute, okay. So are clear to everyone. So if you have any doubt on it, so please uh, do one comment in my comment section, and I will reply you positively. And you, if you have, so, Learner, I think all arguments for privatizations are clear to everyone. So, if you have any doubt on it, so please do one comment in my comment section. I will reply you positively. And if you have missed my last session, that is on liberalizations, and I we all know that liberalization is the policy measures of the is the first policy measures of the new economic policy. So uh, please go and check my description box and my first comment where all previous sessions links are available. Okay. So please go and check it once. I hope it will be a really grateful session to everyone. So now going to the next topic, that is arguments against privatization. So now move on to the next slide. And here we can see some arguments for sorry against privatization. Okay, and which is just opposite to the previously said discussion. So the first point is privatization not always desirable. As explained already, in many cases, public sector enterprises have been set up because the private sector either does not possesses the requisite resources or simply is not interested because of long gestation period and low profitability. Many public sector enterprises are set up to achieve the social welfare, and privatization of such public sector enterprises may not be possible because private sector may not be forthcoming to acquire such public sector units. So that's why privatization not always desirable. Okay. So now move on to the next point, that is welfare of the consumers neglected. So sometimes the social welfare, sometimes the consumers welfare neglected in the privatization enterprise in the private enterprises. Okay, so privatization policy may sometimes neglect consumers interest Private sector enterprises operate mainly with the objective of the profit maximization. Private operators would not like to provide good at subsidized prices to the poor consumers to promote the social welfare. The private sector may not uphold the principles of social justice and public welfare, and they may be interested in maximizing their profit only. The social welfare may be ignored under the policy of privatization. I think this is clear. Move on to the third point, that is possibility of unemployment. Okay, so one of the most genuine fears is that privatization will lead to unemployment. So, and there is always the fear of retrenchment and consequent unemployment when the public enterprises are taken over by the private sector. The experience of privatization in many countries is testimony to the fact that this indeed has happened. So, now move on to the next point, and that is growth of private monopoly. One of the most genuine apprehension is that the sale of a public sector undertaking to a private company may only result in the substitution of a public monopoly by a private monopoly, and these may lead to monopolistic exploitation by efficient private owners replacing the inefficient public ownership. Privatization of electricity in Delhi has seen how consumers are exploited through frequent hikes in electricity rates. So I think clear what is the main reason behind the growth of private monopoly and privatizations, basically, and which is one of the most important against arguments for privatization. So now going to the fifth point, possibility of corrupt practices. The implementation of the policy of privatization may open the door to corruption. Okay, so there is the possibility of undervaluation of the assets of the public sector units to favor the private sector. There may be complicity uh, between the politicians, bureaucrats, and the particular business groups. Now, going to the last point, lopsided industrial development. So, privatization may result in lopsided development of industries in the country. Private enterprises will not be interested in projects which are risky and have a long gestation period with lower profitability. It may retard the growth of basic and heavy industries and infrastructure in the economy. So, basically, I think these are clear to everyone. So, all arguments against privatizations helps to know what is the basic meaning of policy of privatizations, and we have already explained some arguments for privatizations and some arguments against privatizations. Okay, so I think all arguments are clear to everyone. So if you have any doubt on it, so please do one comment this in my comment section. Okay, so Lana, we are done for the today's session. I hope this session will be a very useful session to everyone. So if you like my session, so do not forget to like, share and comment, and please do some support and subscribe my channel for getting more useful sessions. I will come again with a new sessions. Till then, stay tuned. Thank you to all of you. But we have today we have already discussed the basic meaning of উফ বাবা! সম্মিলিত চিৎকার। So, learner, we are done for the today's session. I hope this session will be a very useful session to you. If you like my session, do not forget to like, share, and comment. And please do some support and subscribe my channel for getting more useful sessions. Today, we have already discussed the basic meaning of policy of privatizations and privatizations. What is the basic meaning of privatizations? And some arguments for privatizations and some arguments against privatizations. I think all points are clear to everyone. I will come again with a new exciting session. Till then, stay tuned. Thank you to all of you. Happy learning. Keep commenting. Sorry for the background noise.